Hello, welcome back to the Eau Rouge podcast. And today we're talking about the Williams launch. Now, maybe we were kind of expecting to do some talk about some incredible augmented reality type launch that Williams were planning on doing, but they had a bit of a hitch by the sounds of things. They've used the term hacking, whether or not you can call it that is up for debate, I suppose, but it went wrong, Chris.
Yeah, it did. If you put an app on the App Store 5 days early with secret information about the car, people are going to try and look in it for information of the car. So I don't know what they thought would happen when they did that. It's a good idea, but if they release the app on the day or something next time, downloading apps is so common, you don't need all the time to preload it anymore, do you? But it's got a picture of the car. We've seen the radically different color scheme. Could this new multicolored blue, red, and yellow color scheme be the beginning of something better for what has to have been the hardest falling team in F1?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll move on to talk about that in a few moments. What do you think of the livery?
It looks quite nice. I've got no really strong feelings about it. See it in action. It could be one of those last minute liveries from a team that's about to go out of business and completely changes its colours for sponsors a year before it does. Or it could just be new colours for a new beginning. We'll have to see. But I've got no real attachment. I know it's called a throwback to the colours of the late 80s, early 90s, but it's a bit brighter than that, isn't it? So we'll see what it looks like on the track.
I quite like it, actually. I'm really hoping it's the latter of what you said there, that it's this idea of this new era. I'm really hoping for that. Williams certainly up there as one of my favorite teams. I really like it personally. I think it's really pretty, and I think the white and the blue have always gone well together in Formula One in almost every kind of livery that maybe you see. So I think that it's quite a nice looking car, to be honest. It's a throwback to many different liveries, actually. It's a throwback even to like the 2007 and 8 livery, you could argue as well, with the same kind of mixture of blue and white, just maybe the opposite way around. Or then a throwback to the mid to late 90s with before the red and white, with Damon Hill and Jacques Villeneuve driving the World Championship winning car of 96 and 7. So I think I quite like it. I think it's much better than the white they've had for the last few years. So I'm hoping it'll be, like you said, a new beginning. And talking about new beginnings, the Williams family have now stepped down from their management roles. And obviously we've got Doralton Capital have come in as new owners, or I'm not really sure what the dynamic is, to be honest. But did the Williams family, or maybe even specifically Claire Williams, did they need to part ways?
Probably. I think actually Claire Williams didn't do anything wrong. I think Frank made most of the mistakes, stretching right back to failing to give Adrian Newey a partnership in the early 90s. I think if he'd actually gone through giving Newey the partnership in the team, Williams would have seen success where McLaren had success in the later part of the 1990s and the earlier part of the 2000s. I think that was the point where it went downhill, and everything's been a result of that decision, really. So I think somebody willing to come in, update and freshen up the way the team operates was definitely needed. So, as was money, because small privateer teams can't run too long without sponsors. So it had to happen, didn't it, in the end? As sad as it is to see it change hands out of the hands of the Williams family, I think that was more the doing of the Williams family than it was sad failure of the team.
I think it really is pretty devastating to see a team like Williams down at the bottom. I know it's been spoken about loads over the last few years, but it's not just the fact that they're near the bottom. It's the fact that they have been laughably bad, as in the banter team, as people have been calling them. You know, they were dreadful. And you would think for a team that has had so much success, it's so difficult for them to fall that far. Even, you know, when McLaren fell from grace, of course, over the course of the last decade, they didn't fall that far compared to Williams. So is this new blood that's come into the team, going to propel them up to at least somewhere near mid-table, or is this just too early to say right now?
I think it's going to take longer than that. I think with McLaren, they only ever really became a lower midfield team at worst. They were always in contention for points, even if those points are for 8th and 9th. Whereas Williams have scored 1 point in 2 years. They've only scored 8 points in 3 years. It's ridiculous how far the team has dropped. And it's not a fault of the drivers particularly. The issue lies with such a horribly uncompetitive package. They will score this year for sure, and there will be improved performances. I've got them finishing ahead of Haas, importantly, but I only have them finishing ahead of Haas. I think the rest of it will be some way off in terms of the recovery. If you don't see Williams scoring semi-regularly this year, I would be surprised.
Their saving grace probably is George Russell, right? He is the man at the moment who is hotly tipped to be the next Mercedes driver whenever Hamilton leaves. He's also driving that Williams car, beyond maybe it's what we thought his capabilities were, or certainly that's what we feel like anyway. It is hard sometimes to compare because obviously he's got a teammate who we don't rate particularly highly, and also, who he might be driving that car spectacularly as well. But we think that George Russell has got what it takes to be in the Mercedes seat. I think he showed that when he was leading comfortably in Bahrain, and obviously he lost the win through no fault of his own. But what I worry about with George Russell is that this experience that he's getting at a team who are that far down the grid, he really seems to be losing out compared to other drivers in much stronger cars in terms of experience and learning racecraft. For a lot of his career, he's been at the back where he's not really been even fighting people for positions, compared to maybe a mid-table team. Like if you look at Ocon, for example, getting that experience at Renault, is that going to cause him problems later on in his career, do you think, or can he push past it?
No, I understand the point. But if you look at a team like Minardi, for example, you had drivers like Fernando Alonso, like Mark Webber passing through, even, not quite as successful, but drivers like Alessandro Zanardi sitting in there, and they spent all that time in an uncompetitive machine at the back. But they learned a lot from that experience. If you look at Giovinazzi in the Alpha, for example, I think Giovinazzi does more overtaking than anyone else in F1. He doesn't often have much to show for it, but in terms of overtaking experience, it is there in the nip and tuck fighting. I think Red Bull and to a degree last year's Racing Point were lonely places to be sometimes. You were a long way ahead of the people behind you, but you were nowhere near the Mercedes in front of you either. So you often just spent a lot of the race snaking around on your own, overtaking the occasional backmarker. So I think the skills that Russell is learning, how to really fight in the nip and tuck into a corner, staying clean in traffic, those are really important skills that he'll carry forward with him.
But does he is he going to go straight into that Mercedes seat then, or is he going to maybe go somewhere else first?
The thinking, isn't it, is that he's going to replace Bottas. I'm not convinced that he will replace Bottas for a number of reasons, not least, I think, Mercedes looking to, if not openly support a number one, provide a dynamic in which a number one could certainly thrive. Russell is going to get a good offer. One of the top 3 teams will absolutely have him. Would he consider a move to Aston Martin if Sebastian Vettel doesn't work out? Probably. Certainly from Williams he would. Would he consider a move to Red Bull, as a lot of people are suggesting? You can actually see nearly as many Russell to Red Bull rumours online now as you can Russell to Mercedes rumours. But I think George himself has indicated he's happy to bide his time for that championship winning seat if it means he gets the championship winning seat.
I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit here, but I do think it's an important question to ask because, we've got a lot riding on George Russell in terms of the British hopes, maybe for our next world champion after Lewis Hamilton leaves, but also in terms of now there's a lot of expectation on him after that Mercedes drive. Should he to be regarded as a driver that is in contention for a top 3 team, as you said, should he have scored points for Williams by now?
Yes and no. I think those gutsy point scoring finishes of days gone by, perhaps, Pierluigi Martini stealing an 8th place in Britain or whatever, those days are gone because there are hardly any mechanical failures. You could generally rely as a backmarker, if you were a good backmarker, to pick up a few points finishes where the leaders have collided and there's been the normal sort of 20% attrition you'd see in an F1 race. Whereas now there are just barely any retirements. And if you're in a relatively sterile race setting, a processional track, like say Abu Dhabi, there's a couple of average incidents that bring out the safety car and the normal sort of spread of the field. You're not going to see anything because you're just going to be trapped behind with no way to overtake. So I think there are points when we can say that Russell should really have scored. Losing it on the Kemmel Straight in Belgium when he was on for points, that was a big one.
I think there was a point in San Marino as well at Imola where he dropped it and he was in
a point scoring position.
In a point scoring position.
Yeah, again, and I do think we trash talk Nicholas Latifi, but Latifi finished ahead of Russell as many times as Russell finished ahead of Latifi last season. Yeah, he's hindered by the car. And you can see, if you put him in a good car, he will rise to the occasion. That the race win that he was robbed of at Sakhir is an obvious one. And what he was doing in that car he didn't fit in, going around the outside of Bottas, fighting back up to the lead. That race was not lost by him. It was lost by a rare and ludicrous wobble for Mercedes. So you can see he can do it. It's just you do need to have relatively competitive. If you had him in the same car as Pierre Gasly, for example, that would probably be is he scoring points every race? Yes, he's scoring points every race. Then you could look at it stepping up. But I think he's stuck in a car that is so far back that it's difficult, and it still leads you to ask questions like, should he have scored by now? When we're not really in a position to answer it quite as completely as we'd like.
It would be interesting to see him in a car, like you said, like the AlphaTauri with alongside Pierre Gasly, who's obviously won a race now, and being able to judge his talent against somebody maybe who is, also trying to move up through the ranks of Formula One, or who certainly got his chance, but then for whatever reason it didn't happen. We'll come on to Latifi in a second, because there are a few things that we want to say about him. But I'm interested about these sprint races that are going to be coming in introduced to Formula One next season. And obviously they're not going to be at every race, and they are going to be at a select few races to replace the qualifying format. And George Russell is a master at qualifying from what I've seen. He's consistently made it into Q2 at times, even made it into Q3 a couple of times. He's done really well in qualifying. Are these sprint races actually going to hinder his progress, his ability? Is it going to change his season in some way?
I'm not convinced it will for him, because I think in a sprint race you'd still expect him at worst to be starting about 16th, 17th. He'd be ahead of his teammate. He should be ahead of both Haas's. And someone perhaps like Giovinazzi, or if the Alfa Romeo this year is particularly slow, Kimi, are likely to get dragged into that as well. So I think that it's not going to be a huge issue, because in sprint races as well, things do happen, and that hard racing format is likely to affect drivers like Verstappen, who still have a tendency to overdo it. And all you need is somebody really trying to prove themselves, and they've hit the person in front of them. You've moved up 2 places. So I think that the chaos of the sprint race, the feature they're trying to add into qualifying, will compensate for any potential loss of position through removing traditional qualifying.
So let's move on to Latifi then. We don't see him as George Russell's equal in terms of ability. But also, I have to say, I still prefer him as a driver to the likes of Sirotkin, and he's obviously a better driver than Kubica right now, because not in their prime, but
Yeah,
right now
sadly, in terms of realistic ability at this stage,
he is better. But does he need to have a good season so he can maintain his seat at Williams, or is he relatively safe?
I think he's safe based on the fact that he was Williams' title sponsor on his own last year. When Rocket phones vanished as bizarrely and quickly as they appeared, Safina stepped straight into the gap, and that was the Latifi family business. So I suspect that they would rather see Russell go up in some ways, graduate to the full Mercedes side, than try and replace Latifi, because Latifi brings a lot of financial backing with him. And as we've seen with the Haas launch yesterday, realistically, for the teams at the wrong end of the grid, financial backing is the only concern.
So making sure that he's actually got that level of backing is actually going to be what's keeping him in the sport, rather than his drives necessarily. Are we expecting him to improve on last season at all?
He always improves. Every year he's been in racing, he's improved. Sorry. He was in GP2, then Formula 2 for 6 seasons, 4 of which were full-time, which I grant you was a little bit of a warning flag that perhaps he's not fully Formula 1 material. But he got better and better and better and better, and he came second in his final year in 2019, winning 4 races. So he's not bad at all. He's certainly no worse than Mazepin, even if he hasn't had quite as successful a junior career as someone like Schumacher. He's forgettable. That's the problem, isn't he? The F1 is littered with drivers like Patrick Freisacker or Robert Dornbos or Nicholas Chiesa. Yes, well, at least Michael Hülkenberg gets in the record books.
He does.
But they're drivers whose names you just don't remember. And unless he can fight his way out of Williams and perhaps take his backing towards another team that might be looking for it down the line, perhaps, dare you say, it's something like Urel Cali F1 next year, I don't think we're going to remember that much about him. It'll just be another driver whose career was ultimately cost, like Kazuki Nakajima. Got stuck in a slow car, never seen again.
So let's move on to our predictions. Last year, Williams came last with no points. That's their worst ever season, actually, as it turns out. And I did check that. I went back through all of the seasons they've been in Formula One. That is the first time they've not scored any points, and it's the first time they finished last as well. Sorry, not the first time they finished last, but the first time they didn't score points. So it was the worst season they've ever had. And we had Latifi finishing in last. Latifi came last of the drivers with a regular seat in F1. Obviously, there were a couple of replacement drivers in last year, but Latifi came last out of the regular drivers, and Russell finished 18th with those 3 points that he picked up in Mercedes.
So, yeah, I think 9th for them, 19th for Latifi, behind Schumacher, but ahead of Mazepin. 18th isn't out of the question for him. I don't see him taking 17th from Giovinazzi. I think that's too optimistic. But I can see him finishing ahead of both Haases, partly just because he's got that level of experience now, but partly because I think the Williams will improve and he's no longer new to the sport. Russell, I've got him right up in 15th, just behind Tsunoda. I think that he will do well enough to outscore both Alphas, both Haases, and his teammate. There isn't too much else to say about Williams, is it? They won't be so bad next year.
Well, exactly, and that's what I'm banking on them to be slightly better. So I've also got them down in 9th. I was looking through my predictions actually today, and I realized I put Tsunoda and Raikkonen in the same place. I put them both 16th. So I'm going to class that as their joint 15th. But what I've actually done is I've gone for Raikkonen to finish 16th and Tsunoda to finish 15th, which means I have to put Russell in 14th. So that's pretty high. But if he's going to be finishing around about 14th, then yeah, I would be expecting Williams to finish on double double figures in terms of points as well, which would be the first time we've done that in a while. So yeah, I've gone for Williams in 9th as well, for Haas to come last, and Williams 9th, with Latifi in 19th ahead of Mazepin. I think he will come last this year. And yeah, like I said, Russell in 14th, just pipping Tsunoda. I know we've already spoken about this a little bit. I think Tsunoda's going to have a bit of a tough season this year, and I think Russell's experience in the sport is going to be able to just kind of push him above. And obviously, Tsunoda's in a much better car, is what we're expecting. But I just think Russell might have the edge. I think he's going to be really, really pushing because he wants that Mercedes seat. He thinks Hamilton's going to be retiring, and he's going to be really going for it. So that'll probably lead to a few mistakes, as we've seen before, but hopefully also to many more points.
Well, I think I'd be delighted if he finished that high up. I'm just not quite convinced that he will.
We will find out very soon. Well, the end of the month, of course, is when the first race is. But that's it from us. Thank you for listening to the Williams launch podcast. We're back next Wednesday, I believe it is, for the final team launch, which is Ferrari. Hopefully we will actually get to see something a bit substantial. I'm not really sure why they've split it up and also left it so late compared to everybody else, but I suppose that's Ferrari. They want to be different and special. So we'll see you on Wednesday for that. Thank you so much for listening to this. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, turn the notifications on if you want to hear more, and of course leave a comment. We're really interested to see what you want to say. Thank you so much for listening.